Murders are the ultimate mystery. Where were they killed? By whom? And with what motive? Were they killed deliberately or by chance? Questions which, as of now, have no answers.
Nearly 40 years ago, the Colonial Parkway became a symbol of terror for a generation of Virginians.
8 young people, all may have died at the hand of the same killer.
It's Virginia's oldest and largest serial killing spree. The Colonial Parkway murders.
Oh my God, there's somebody that's targeting these kids.
A predator was hunting here.
The cases involved abandoned cars at notorious lovers' lanes.
Selecting targets at random.
The cars contained victims' clothing, wallets, and keys, with no signs of struggle.
And leaving no survivors.
It's horrible.
Now we're able to say, after all of those years, the perpetrator has finally been identified. Serial killers always have a pause between their events, but as time moves on, the hunger returns. Let me do this again, because God, it was good the first time. At about 5:30 in the evening, 2 park policemen respond to a 911 call reporting an accident on the Colonial Parkway. They are flagged down by an individual. They follow him a short distance to an embankment above the York River, which flows through the park. They see a 1980 white Honda sedan, nose first in the river. They immediately work their way down to see if there's someone trapped in this car. They find 2 women in the car with a ghost-like appearance, and their throats have been deeply slashed. This is not an accident. It's a homicide.
What you see in front of you is the actual Colonial Parkway.
My name is Danny Plott. During the Colonial Parkway murder investigations, I was a special agent with the Virginia State Police. Back when the 1986 murder occurred, the Colonial Parkway was similar, but it wasn't as well maintained. It's a beautiful scenic drive. But in the late 80s, when these murders occurred, it was a pretty dark and spooky place.
Plott is an old-time cop. Danny has suffered the slings and arrows, like me, of the press and the public and the 2-bit politicians and so on and so on. So it was a natural thing that he and I became friends. Hey, man.
Joe?
How are you?
Good. Yourself?
The same. I'm still walking around.
Me and you both.
Danny first called me because he liked my show.
I watched an episode of Homicide Hunter, and Joe's show was wonderful. You know, he would say something, and then there'd be the my. I was impressed.
And he let me know that and asked me what it was like to live in Colorado Springs, and I informed him I had moved.
And he said, I live in Suffolk, Virginia. No shit.
He asked if we could meet for lunch. I said yes.
Talking with Joe is an experience in itself. His ability with murders is amazing to me. I talked to him for hours about the Colonial Parkway murders.
Which I had vaguely heard about 2,200 miles away in Colorado. They meant nothing to me at the time because they were outside my jurisdiction. But now they interested me. Danny Plott mentioned that there's been an enormous amount of press coverage. There's been a book written about him, all kinds of things. And I did not disagree with his thought process on the entire case. He was certainly on the right track. For 37 years, the killer was unknown, and the Colonial Parkway murders was his torturous career case.
Solving the case became an infatuation. It became frustrating. Sometimes we felt like we were really close in finding who did these murders, and then something would knock them out of it. Every stone that you could think of was overturned, yet here we were. Nobody was in handcuffs. The Colonial Parkway is a rural, scenic road that connects three of the biggest historical places in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Yorktown all the way to Jamestown and the Williamsburg area.
And because it's a federal park, there are no structures, no businesses, no billboards, no marks of the 21st century. There are trees and bushes and vines. So if you're on this stretch at night, you're in a Stephen King novel for 23 miles.
The Parkway also has multiple overlooks. You can call it a lover's lane. If you wanted privacy, it was the perfect place. The murders started in October of 1986. The park rangers were aghast at what they saw.
The park police summoned the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the only jurisdiction within that park, because it is federal property.
The two girls, they were identified immediately because their identifications were in the car. Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski. Their throats have been cut very badly. This was something brutal. What was very puzzling to the FBI, that blood was not in the car.
The amount of blood would have been substantial, and we've never found any bloody prints, any bloody clothing. Clearly, inside of that car is not the crime scene. Somewhere else they were killed and put into that car. Was it driven there? I don't know.
They examine the ground in this pull-off area, assuming they will find a second set of tire tracks. They find tire tracks that match the tires on the Honda, but they find no tire tracks of another vehicle.
What was really perplexing was the car was covered in diesel fuel. And there were matches around where it appeared that someone had tried to get the diesel fuel to light.
Diesel has a very high ignition point. You could light an entire book of matches and throw it into liquid diesel fuel, and all that would happen is the diesel fuel would put out the fire.
It was a failed attempt at trying to cover up their crime.
Now, what does that tell you? Whoever this is has diesel fuel. There's a lot of people that carry diesel fuel around in their vehicle. Truckers do, people that have a diesel car, or people with boats. Interesting.
This was not an easy case to solve. Why would somebody target two women There's no money taken, and they're viciously, I mean viciously attacked.
Whoever is responsible for this crime is an organized offender. He has a plan. He somehow gets control of these people, and then he attacks and kills both and sends the car over the side of this embankment. You and I both know it's not difficult to push a car. You kick it out of gear, and one person can easily move a car.
Sure. But remember that it's sitting in an overlook. It's a paved overlook. Then you have a patch of grass, and there's a curb. Not a high curb, but there's a curb. So someone or some people were strong enough to push it, pop it over that. But with two passengers in it, always felt like it was somebody with some strength.
Likely a man. Could have a helper. So now you have a solid view of what this crime scene looks like, but you're not even really sure how it happened. You need an autopsy to tell you more. So the FBI agents head to the Virginia State Medical Examiner's office. The autopsy results show that the girls had been dead for a minimum of 24 hours.
Rebecca's throat was cut, and it was cut viciously. But Kathleen was almost decapitated. There's a brutality in that. I think that says that somebody was really angry for whatever reason.
There was no evidence of sexual assault on either victim, but they found something else. The autopsy revealed that both girls suffered ligature strangulation. A ligature is any device used to put pressure on the neck to restrict the windpipe to die from asphyxia.
And in Kathleen's hair, there was a small piece of rope.
The autopsy further decides that the throat slashing was accomplished post-mortem and had nothing to do with their death. They were dead when their throats were cut. They were essentially killed twice. Who the hell are we dealing with here?
Rebecca and Kathleen were last seen Thursday night. A Honda Civic was found off the Colonial Parkway. It had been rolled into these bushes almost into the water. The women were found with their throats slit.
The FBI agents go and notify the two victims' families of their untimely demise and say, "Tell me about your daughter."
My name's Bill Thomas. I'm the older brother of Kathy Thomas. She was fun and smart and a great friend, and her attitude was just so positive that people were drawn to her.
She graduated in the second class from the U.S. Naval Academy that had women.
She ended up first serving on this ship, a submarine tender called the USS L.Y. Spear. Now, it's during this time, though, she's also investigated for being a lesbian.
In the 1980s, the Navy remained archaic with draconian rules. Homosexuality was not acceptable in any form, particularly so in a female.
This was not going to be a place that she could live her life as a lesbian in an open fashion.
And she resigned her commission.
Even though she had left the Navy with great reluctance, Kathy was actually turning a corner into a really happy, less pressured version of her life. She was dating this wonderful woman, Rebecca Dowski.
Rebecca Dowski came from Poughkeepsie, New York. She originally attended Dickinson College and had transferred to the College of William and Mary in Virginia. She was a very bright student, and she really fit in well there.
She was in her senior year, sweet, smart, extremely athletic. She was on a championship women's softball team. So both Kathy and Becky had this I can accomplish anything attitude.
Kathy and her girlfriend were not accepted by society at large. Privacy was very important to them. What better place than the Colonial Parkway at night?
The FBI investigators focused on Kathy being in a lesbian relationship with Becky. Now, what really makes that come into play is she had been dating someone else.
There were all of these rumors that one of Rebecca's ex-lovers had gotten angry and, retaliated against the both of them.
He was Muslim. The Muslim religion does not always look at gay or lesbian relationships kindly.
Ex-boyfriend Sharif Ali realizes that Becky has left him for another woman. He is furious. He has very strong feelings about homosexual behavior, and now he's been passed over for a member of the same sex by his girlfriend. It makes him an astounding suspect. So they bring Ali Sharif in for questioning, and he admits that he has been embarrassed by her departure for another female, but he would never do her harm. He also has an alibi. He was in Washington, D.C. for the weekend, 200 miles away during the time of the killings. He may have had a motive, but he physically couldn't have done it. Over the next few weeks, the investigation slows, but the notoriety of the case really starts to move.
The two friends were last seen together in Dowski's dorm room at 7 p.m. Police sources think Dowski and Thomas then drove here to the Colonial Parkway.
I remember the ratings were extremely high. People were watching. They were talking about the romantic relationship between the two. One of the motives for a killer is someone that is opposed to this type of lifestyle.
Friends say driving along the Colonial Parkway was a Thursday night routine for Dowski and Thomas. But what happened October 9th wasn't routine. It was murder.
I don't think we understood the full gravity of what happened out there in October of '86 until September of '87. Then I think it took on a different life of its own.
An olive white sheriff's deputy is out patrolling the Ragged Island Wildlife Management Area. There is a black pickup truck. The door is open, and no one is around.
Something was going on. The truck was running, the radio was on, and there were shoes and articles of clothing in the truck.
He calls for assistance. They go through the truck and they notice a wallet on top of the dashboard that contains a driver's license.
It was a gentleman named David Noblin. David Noblin was 19 years old. He was a resident of Newport News.
His mother has already reported him missing because he didn't return home after an evening out.
The last time he was seen was in the company of a young lady named Robin Edwards. Robin was also a Newport News resident, and she was 14 years old and was also missing.
Now everyone is alarmed. So where are the occupants of this vehicle, and what has happened to them?
Ragged Island is a creepy place to go. It's very secluded.
This parking lot was used as a lover's lane type area. It sounds a lot like the Colonial Parkway.
They had a feeling this wasn't going to end well, and they were right.
"20-year-old David Knobling and 14-year-old Robin Edwards were last seen Saturday night. His truck was found with the keys in the ignition, door open, and radio on near the James River Bridge.
The Isle of Wight Sheriff's Department launches a massive search. It's very difficult to search. There are vines and weeds and brush of all sorts. They could be almost anywhere.
Personnel from multiple agencies, a helicopter, search dogs.
This search goes on for days.
And unfortunately, on the third day, they found something.
My dad was out there at Ragged Island, chest waders, walking that whole area, looking for him.
Carl Knobling, God bless him. There were people that were telling Carl Knobling not to go down the beach. He said, you aren't going to stop me. I'm going down there.
David Knobling's father, Carl Knobling, found the bodies. I can only imagine what that's like, because they were not in very good shape.
Oh, he was brokenhearted. Brokenhearted, and we were out there with him. It was so devastating. Carl Knobling was a broken man.
Yeah, my dad didn't even have a chance to call us and give us a heads up. My mom and I, we found out on the news. I remember hearing my mom scream. My God. It was horrible.
The bodies were found further down on the riverbank itself. The James River there is brackish or brine. It's not fresh water, it's not salt water. It's a combination. And that did not do good things to human bodies.
Both bodies are bloated from decomposition, having been out for 3 or 4 days.
Robin Edwards had one gunshot wound, execution style, to the back of her head. David had 2 gunshot wounds. A gunshot wound to the left shoulder and 1 shot to the back of the head. I think Robin was shot first. And I think David knew he had 1 chance. We speculate he tried to climb a sandy clay bank, and he was within almost grabbing distance of a tree line. That's where he was shot once in the shoulder. That incapacitated him enough to where he was then shot in the back of the head and killed.
I totally disagree with that. He would definitely not run from a fight. Even if the guy had a gun, he wouldn't run from it.
So why are these bodies such a long walk from where the truck was located? Why would they go such a far distance from this vehicle?
When you leave that parking lot and you want to go down here, you have to walk down this boardwalk because all this is marshland, like swamp. Mm-hmm. So to get down to here, good little walk. But you don't walk down a wooden, older boardwalk barefoot.
Not willingly.
No, not willingly. So how did they end up down there?
2 possibilities, in my opinion. They're running from somebody, barefoot because they don't have time to put their shoes on, or they're marched down there by the perpetrator. So who would want to murder these two people in cold blood? Investigators go to the families to see if they can determine suspects.
This is the way I seen my brother, like this one. Just him laid back, cutting up, having fun, smiling, you know? I definitely looked up to David. He tried toughening me up, and he did it with kicking my butt a lot. He was a great brother. I met Robin through my cousin Jason. We went to the same school together. She was always a real cool person.
We had sort of prepared ourselves for them to find her either hurt, possibly drowned. We were not prepared to find her murdered.
Robin was the youngest of the Colonial Parkway murder victims. She was 14. She had been through a lot in life. She was the kind of girl that often ran away. She got into trouble.
She could be very, very sweet, and she could be the most aggravating and irritating child in the world. She was very independent.
But Robin was also at a turning point in her life. She was finally starting to apply herself to her classes. She was starting to turn things around.
The big questions unanswered are, why was David with Robin at the wildlife preserve? And what happened after they got there?
That day, I followed him out, bummed a cigarette from him, and we talked in the driveway for 15, 20 minutes, I guess, and then he left. I carried that through my life, that I was able to say bye to him. I don't know why. It just seems so small now, but at the time it was big.
So they learned that David and Robin were hanging out at an arcade in the area with their friends, and David agreed to take Robin home. They are not a couple, according to the family, but what does the killer see? A man and a woman. And what would he assume from that? They are lovers in Lover's Lane, as were the first two women. Much of this is very familiar.
The murders are the ultimate mystery. Where were they killed? By whom? And with what motive? Were they killed deliberately or by chance? Questions which, as of now, have no answers.
That drove those of us that worked on the task force that we need to find this person because they're just heartless and brutal. When David and Robin were autopsied, the investigation revealed that Robin had been sodomized and there was still semen in her cavity. The medical examiner said this sample is very degraded because you had bodies laying in the water for 3 days.
This is 1987. DNA is in its infancy.
DNA databases were either non-existent or just starting, but the sample was preserved.
So now what? There's a possibility the motive is sexual assault of the female victim, but it's only a possibility. But why kill them? There's no answer for that. Despite the differences, the similarities are just too great. Proximity, darkness, area, type. People don't get killed in parked cars very often. The odds are great. This is the same person or persons responsible for both. You've got a hunter, somebody who's busy. A year later, the appetite returns.
They haven't been arrested. They probably haven't even been talked to.
No, they haven't been found. So now they become convinced that maybe they're pretty clever. Let me do this again, because God, it was good the first time.
But I'm not going to do it where I did it before.
No, but still in the general vicinity. They kill where it's convenient.
Places they know.
And I would be very worried that the bodies were going to start to pile up here. 4 dead, and there's going to be more dead if that theory is correct. He's going to do it again. He will continue unless he is stopped. These murders came to be known as the Colonial Parkway murders.
Police sources claim that two cases are so alike, the same persons may be responsible.
This story really picked up from the very beginning. It was very much an East Coast highlighted story because double murders were incredibly rare.
These young couples are violently dead in an otherwise picturesque place. How could this be?
Everyone was talking about whether this is the work of a serial killer.
Once the police realized, oh my God, we're dealing with connected crimes or potentially connected crimes, police presence on the Parkway increased dramatically.
And that was the first time we heard about the possibility of a serial killer or a pattern emerging. And I felt the investigation begin to shift.
It turned this area upside down. I mean, people were scared to go up and down the parkways, and my mom was scared to death when I went out, scared to death.
Everyone is very busy now looking for people who seem to be out of the area, seem to be doing something that doesn't look right.
After the murders, people realized they may be going to the Colonial Parkway at their own risk, but it didn't stop them. Sure, the last thing they thought of is that they would get approached or grabbed on the Colonial Parkway. It scared a lot of people, but unfortunately it didn't scare them all.
The families held a vigil, a memorial to remind us all the killer is still out there.
The pressure exerted by the press and by the public results in the formation of a Colonial Parkway Murders Task Force, where agencies come together. More heads are better than one. Danny Plott was a trained and experienced homicide agent. Plott became in command.
We were given a conference room and told to have at it.
The common theory at the time is that the perpetrator is driving around the Colonial Parkway area looking for victims parked in a car alone in the dark in a lover's lane kind of area.
One thing we tried, we took a male agent and a female agent, and we put them in cars, different nights, different times, and waited to be approached. I worked some surveillance. I had a beard. I had actual hair. I was lucky enough to know who I was with, but you run out of things to talk about after a couple hours. Surveillance is cool in the movies. It is far from it in real life. We were approached. But all we did was, I think, scare the living daylights out of somebody that just was hoping they could see naked flesh. Somebody that just kind of hung around and tried to look in. Nobody wished any more for an arrest than those of us that were on that task force.
Your killer is a shadow in the night. You're pedaling a bike that is stationary, and no matter how hard you pedal, it goes nowhere.
The task force established tip lines.
And you get hit with tons of tips that are just crazy.
Many people will call in and report that little green men from Mars are responsible for this. But every once in a while, somebody says something that sounds reasonable, and you pay attention to that.
There was a man named Sammy Ryder that said he saw Robin and David. Maybe here's a lead we can work with.
Sam Reeder was at Ragged Island and remembers seeing David's truck.
I just took one quick look around. I flashed my headlights back in the brush, but I couldn't see anything.
He paints himself as an eyewitness. They bring Sammy Reeder in, they talk to him. So Mr. Reeder says that he stops at Ragged Island on his way home from a date. He notices this truck.
He said that he saw Robin and David get out of the car.
He admires the truck, said it's very nice, very clean.
The truck was running, the radio was on.
So he says all these things, none of which is earth-shattering because it's what the press reported.
Another statement was, I heard 2 shots. They had to be coming from the marshland way in the back. I decided it was time to leave and I left. There are several things wrong with Ryder's statement.
There were actually 3 shots fired that night. 2 were fired at David Knobling and 1 at Robin.
Sammy didn't mention anything about them being barefoot, but their shoes are in the car.
The sand down there is not smooth sand. It is made up with a lot of jagged shells, etc.
It is extremely unlikely, not wearing shoes or socks, that they would walk this far in rough terrain on their own accord.
Somebody marched them down to the place where they died. They did not get out of the car and go strolling down there.
He is inserting himself in a serial killer investigation. Now, why would he do that?
When Mr. Ryder was pressed, he finally admitted, well, I took money out of David Knobling's wallet. I don't know if he figured if he came up with this tip and they found his print somewhere on the truck, he would be able to say, well, I was just looking in. Well, I think he did it out of trying to cover his ass.
What he saw was a wallet, and he took advantage of it. Oh, Sammy, why are you wasting our time with this? He didn't kill 2 people. He didn't know who did.
Law enforcement were very frustrated with the investigation. They weren't solving the case. People were fearful.
I've noticed that a lot of girls aren't walking on campus by themselves, especially late at night.
Obviously, we have to consider that there's a dangerous person or persons still in the community.
We needed this task force to try to, if not tie these murders together, find common denominators or separate them.
Plott is experienced and he's smart. He sees the rivers. And he said, hey, look at this map. What is around all of these crime scenes? Water. How do you move in water? You move in water in a boat.
The thing I remember about the autopsies of Kathleen and Rebecca was this rope that was found. It was a piece of nautical rope, which to me, nautical rope is either used on a boat or used to tie up a boat.
Now that is an interesting fact. What if our man is a boater? Maybe we've been thinking about this wrong the entire time. How did he approach these people?
If he used the boat in some way, I think he had to anchor the boat on the river and use a smaller boat to come to the bank.
If you got a trolling motor, it makes little or no sound. So you can maneuver around in this water and nobody even knows you're there. You have no obligation legally to put lights on your boat. You're not at sea. You're in inland waterways. No one's going to question you. You're a waterman.
Right.
The word waterman is very specific to this area. It's people who are involved in the oyster business and the fishing business in the York River, the James River, and the Rappahannock River. They have their own dialect. They have their own language generationally, all the way back to the colonial period.
This could be a waterman. That's someone we need to concentrate on.
So what else do we know? The toys used in these crimes are the toys that watermen use as tools. Most of these boats have diesel motors.
Diesel was used in Rebecca and Kathleen's murder. Whoever killed them brought diesel fuel with them to the scene.
We have an extremely sharp instrument that cuts their throats. Fishermen take care of their knives.
Part of their living.
Part of their living, sharp as a razor. You can fillet a fish in a heartbeat. This all became known as the waterman theory. Danny Plott and other cops he brought with him survey the fishermen in the area. These are an unusual lot. They operate in private, they're loners.
They are tough as oak. They did not take kindly to being, even interviewed.
They picked a lifestyle that they don't want to interact with people. And for straight-laced FBI guys to walk into a waterman bar and say, hey, we want to ask some questions, they're not going to get any progress from that.
At this point, it's an all-hands-on-deck sort of investigation. But as it turns out, shortly they will discover even that is not enough. The park police have informed Danny Plott they have found yet another abandoned vehicle on the Colonial Parkway. The keys are in the ignition, the car is running, and nobody's around, and Plott's heart is in his throat.
You're going, oh shit, here we go again.
The Colonial Parkway serial killer is back in business. Danny Plott is very concerned. Where are the people from this car?
This has a lot of similarities to the other murders.
Lovers lanes, near water, only 1 mile from the Thomas Dowski crime scene. 1 mile? Are you kidding me?
The park rangers informed Plott that they ran a registration check on the vehicle and determined it's owned by Keith Call. They contact Call's parents. They report him missing that morning. The parents say he was with a female named Cassandra Haley. And Cassandra Haley's parents also report her missing. Where are they?
Some of their clothes and the car keys found inside the car.
A Navy security team looks through the woods. Park rangers use a bloodhound and a boat for air scent over the water. Other dogs comb the beachfront area.
A dog traced the couple's scent to the water's edge.
And then the scent ends.
The dogs are telling them those bodies are in this water. But they're not there now because water moves and it moves bodies with it.
I searched the Parkway in a company of United States Marines who walked an arm's length away from each other across a whole area near where that car was found.
The search dogs take the scent and they march directly to the York River.
And that night, the nor'easter had been passing through.
Right. High waves.
High current.
60, 70 mile an hour winds and driving rain. So they are disposed of, killed by some method or means. They go in the York River, the nor'easter comes and sweeps them where? Out to sea. Maybe all the way out.
Wouldn't take much.
And these two poor, unfortunate young people are never found.
Not a trace of them. The families couldn't even have a funeral.
I didn't want to think the worst to start with. All of a sudden, there's all these police calling the house. And then as the day went on, you just kind of came into that reality that something had happened. Keith just vanished into thin air.
Keith was really just a good-hearted kid. And you just don't ever think that when somebody walks out of the door, it's going to be the last time you see him.
He was into computers, We had some of the first. He was in there banging away on his Commodore 64 and learning everything about that. And he was just like that 80s guy.
In 1988, when this happened, he was in his first semester of college. And then with Cassandra, they were friends. And she was really a pretty girl.
Cassandra was the it girl. She was a cheerleader. She's got a magnetism about her. She was very bright. She was really looking forward to completing her education and going on with a career.
They went out that night to a movie, and then they decided to stop by some kind of college party going on there.
Friends confirm Keith and Sandra partied at the University Square Apartments April 10th. They left around 2 a.m., then disappeared.
And then Cassandra had to be home at a certain time. They said their goodbyes, and that's the last time anybody saw them.
The Parkway was not a place that you went like that and just left your car there. Keith was more responsible than that. The other murders had already happened. Keith wouldn't have went there.
It always haunted me, and it haunts me to this day, that we did not find Keith and Cassandra's remains. We have to find the murdering son of a bitch that did this.
They finally decide, all right, let's go back and start over.
About 6 months into the FBI task force of the Colonial Parkway murders, we had come to a couple conclusions. Looking at all the scenes, the vehicles, the wallets out, we decided who we were looking for was a person of authority.
So imagine now it's nighttime here. You're with somebody you care about. You're not really thinking about anything. And then suddenly, there's a knock on your window, and a man with a flashlight says, "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here."
What if this killer poses as a policeman? In the process of somebody getting out their ID, he pulls a gun, so he now has control. Could that be? Of course it could.
During this era, you could buy an old cop car, complete with a side light, etc., for $300 at a police auction, and duplicate being a cop.
We decided to hold a press conference with the FBI's blessing, and it exploded.
It reached the point where, even in the newspaper articles, they were warning people to verify that if they were being pulled over, that it was really a policeman.
The media took it and ran with it because it made a good story.
Nothing about this seems to work, and then you begin to convince yourself that nothing will ever work. Law enforcement are running out of room at the morgue. This is one serious guy. He's not gonna stop. As cases go on for years, they become more difficult. The Colonial Parkway murders have slowed down. Nothing much has been happening. No news, no new events. An anonymous tipster calls the task force and says an individual has been harassing couples in the Lover's Lane pull-offs on the Colonial Parkway.
They called him a peeping Tom.
Really? Now that is interesting. Who might you be, Mr. Peeping Tom? And what are you doing on the Parkway?
Through a FBI or state police tip line, we get a tip that a man in a blue truck is stopping and looking in parked cars on the Parkway. They get a tag. The tag reads EM R-A-W. Eat 'em raw. What do you eat raw?
Oysters.
That truck comes back to a waterman named Alan Wilmer. So now the FBI has somebody that they can look at.
This could be him. This could be the Colonial Parkway killer, and they need to act fast.
The FBI and the Virginia State Police now have what appears to be a viable suspect. The FBI surveils him, goes to his residence, where they find him cleaning his truck.
They noticed Wilmer was out spray painting the back of his vehicle, and that he was bleaching the interior of the vehicle.
Now, why would he do that? Is he concealing evidence?
Maybe this is our guy. They immediately go to get a search warrant.
The FBI return to Wilmer's place. They present him with the warrant. He is cooperative. He steps aside and they search the premise.
They do the search warrant of his truck. Doesn't reveal a whole lot, but the search of his house reveals several things.
They find an enormous supply of pornography. They find guns. They find pairs of handcuffs and other bondage devices.
I am not saying that makes you someone that kills people, but you put everything together. This is not your average guy.
They continue to talk to him. He denies any knowledge of any of this, denies everything. They have no evidence that could result in an arrest. They decide that they will have an FBI polygraphist take a shot at this guy.
Mr. Wilmer was interviewed, and he did admit to being on the Parkway and approaching a vehicle or two,
which was very useful information. But his story changed a little bit.
He said, yeah, I was on a Colonial Parkway, but I wasn't in that particular pull-off. I was in another one. I walk around out there and I look for places to fish. Nothing wrong with that. And there isn't anything wrong with that. So he takes the polygraph. And the polygraphist says he didn't do this. He's innocent. And the FBI looks at that polygraphist and says, well, you better be right.
The FBI decided that him passing a polygraph and the lack of direct physical evidence was enough to say he's not the one.
He looks good, nothing happens. He moves on, and so does the task force.
FBI and state police, if one of us got a lead, we'd let the other one know. But the leads, they just weren't there. And, a family member, they weren't shy, and I don't blame them. And they sometimes weren't shy in the media. My son and daughter, sister, brother, brutally murdered. What are you doing?
You didn't hear nothing about it. The FBI didn't talk to anybody. And then Joyce would consistently pick up the phone and call them up and ask them about the case and all that.
It seemed like they weren't giving us a lot of information. It just kind of went dead, and I didn't handle it very good at all. I mean, even to this day, that is the worst thing that's ever happened. It's just like somebody walks out the door and they're fine, and they just don't come back, and you don't have answers. You don't have a body.
The anxiety was terrible at that time. I mean, it's just not knowing what happened to him, just nothing but anxiety. It just doesn't go away,
You have to become your own advocate because no one else will do it for you. We're the ones now kind of trying to advance this case. I'm looking for answers. Who killed my younger sister and her girlfriend? All of these other families, mine included, deserve answers.
All our answer was, we're doing everything we can. It had been years, nothing.
Labor Day weekend 1989, and a Virginia State trooper is investigating an abandoned vehicle in a rest area that's left running with the keys in the ignition.
And when he ran the tag, of course, it ding, 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 ding. This is a car of a missing person.
The car comes back to 21-year-old Daniel Lauer, reported missing with 18-year-old Anna Maria Phelps. The Colonial Parkway killer is back. And maybe this time he's left the waterfront. The investigators are instantly suspicious that this is the Colonial Parkway killer. But what's different?
Along I-64, their car was found at a westbound rest stop.
They call it the New Kent Rest Area.
This rest area is many miles from the Colonial Parkway. This is inland, not the waterfront where he has been for years.
So I went up there and I find the car, a gold Chevy Nova with black primer.
He sees this car, clothes in the back seat, keys in the ignition, car running. It is no question, it is deja vu. We're dealing with the same guy.
Anna Maria Phelps was a 18-year-old young lady from Amelia County, Virginia, who had recently dropped out of school.
School wasn't for her. She wanted to work. She wanted to get ahead in life. She wanted to be on her own. And she had a boyfriend named Clinton Lauer.
The other victim, Daniel Lauer, was her boyfriend's brother.
Daniel, he was a horse lover. He liked riding. He was 6 foot tall. He was a dominating force. And anybody that handles horses, he wasn't a weakling either. Daniel was doing very well. His father had a painting business and he worked there. His father had gotten him a Chevy Nova. In many respects, he was on the right path for independence himself. And Daniel had decided he wanted to kind of get out on his own. And the plan was for Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer to drive to Virginia Beach. And the best way to get there was on I-64.
We learned from the families that they never arrived in Virginia Beach.
If they are in fact missing and they're not in this car, then where are they? Could the Colonial Parkway killer have abducted and killed them just like the others?
Where are these people? What has happened to them?
And the search begins.
There was a search by special agents of the Virginia State Police and troopers of the Virginia State Police in the general area. No Anna Maria and Daniel. Again, it's very frustrating. And I can only imagine what it's like for the families.
We really love both of them very much. And if there's anything at all that you can do to help, we'd appreciate it.
6 weeks later, on October 21st, 1989, 2 turkey hunters find something shocking.
I get a call, hey, we need you to go near the New Kent Rest Area. I'm there. There was a logging road. That was the best way to describe it. And there was a deputy station there. And I stopped and he said, go up here. You didn't walk very far up the fork of the road. And then you went into the woods. I could see they already had a tent set up.
They find skeletonized remains of humans. 2 skulls and bones.
These are 2 young people that, unfortunately, best way to describe it nicely is they melted into the ground.
They were so badly decomposed at the time that it was very difficult to determine exactly what happened.
That's me with a shovel in my hand. I would have been 33, maybe. I believe it had ranged slightly, as you can tell. One man's wearing a raincoat. The bottom photo is Anna Maria's locket. That was found at the fork of the road. We speculate that maybe was where she was killed, and that locket came off. When the general area was searched, there was, very little to find. No bullets, no knife, no anything.
An autopsy confirmed the body of Anna Marie Phelps. Another body is believed to be Dan Lauer.
The skeletal remains were taken to the Smithsonian Institute with the forensic anthropologist, Dr. Doug Owsley.
Autopsies of skeletons yield little other than sex and age, and any wounds to the bone structure.
When he examined the skeletal remains, Dr. Owsley found what he deemed a knife wound on Anna Maria's left hand. And he speculated that if someone is getting ready to cut your throat, you hold your hands up, and it was a diagonal knife wound on her third finger. That's the only trauma that he could say.
Is this the Colonial Parkway killer? Well, of course it is. There's a change here and there in the MO, but so what? Either way, they work.
The couple's disappearance is strikingly similar to others, including Robin Edwards and David Knobling.
The only difference is that they were found in the woods instead of in the river.
The victims are in cars. There's two of them. They're probably very vulnerable.
He strangles, cuts the throat of Rebecca and Kathleen. He shoots David and Robin. He disposes of the bodies, however it was done, of Keith and Cassandra, and then lays the other two side by side.
There are a couple things that are different, but there are some things that are not.
Two on the Parkway, two within easy driving distance of the Parkway.
His method up to now has been the sea and the water. Now his method is a concealment in the deep woods. What does that mean? Did he become fearful of the increased patrol activity on the Parkway? Probably. He doesn't want to stop killing. He just wants to stop the police from getting close to him. And the reality is he may never be found. This individual has eluded law enforcement for years. If he's shifting his MO and he's committing other murders, we may not even recognize them as his. He's a killer. That's what he does. The question always becomes, has he done other crimes? Of course he has.
That's what's kind of scary.
There's going to be other victims. How many did he kill? We have no clue. There have been 8 dead. There's a possibility there are others dead that we don't even know about. And the case continues to be cold, despite their focus on it for years. They've gotten nowhere fast.
After the task force, I worked several years in the fugitive unit as a special agent, which took me away from it, and it was given to somebody else. But I worked in and around the same office, and I did not have the least bit problem saying, hey, anything new with Ragged Island? Anything new with the Parkway murders? No, go away.
Despite all the effort, despite all the leads and all of the investigative work, the years begin to tick by, and no justice has been found for the families.
My mom and my dad kept in touch with the police over the years, and I took it with a grain of salt. I had zero expectation about finding out who killed my brother after the 10th year. 20th year, the 30th year.
And it's been a horrendous waiting game the whole time. Just a cold waiting game. It's all it's been.
It's not like it was forgotten, but it's just like, what do you do? None of us were brought up in law enforcement. None of us had any background on what to do if your brother is abducted or murdered.
You've got 8 victims, 16 moms and dads. We've lost 9 of them so far. Both of my parents passed away. It's been 37 years. I can't really say it gets easier to talk about.
All of these victims have been dead much longer than they were alive.
Many of the investigators involved in this are retired, but this is not a case anybody ever forgets. It's been very hard on Danny.
I retired from the state police in 2013. But those murders have never been far from my mind, and I still remember the frustration of why can't we find this person?
It's the worst feeling in the world. You feel like a failure. You feel like you haven't done your job. You know better. You did everything humanly possible. It just wasn't enough. And you beat yourself up for that. December 2017, law enforcement responds to a 911 complaint about a foul odor emanating from a private residence. They find a badly decomposed body that basically is a bed full of soup.
The decay was horrible. They don't know if they're dealing with a natural death, a suicide, or a murder.
The autopsy reveals advanced arteriosclerosis and blocked arteries. In other words, his heart got blocked up, and it stopped, and so did he. They take samples of these remains for the purpose of obtaining DNA and the possibility of using it to identify the individual. Little did anyone know this was someone who was directly under their noses the entire time.
January of 2024 was when we got the first substantial break in the Colonial Parkway murders.
A detective is going through the daily crime sheets, notices this death case, looks at the name, and recognizes it. It was from years ago.
I was called, and the person said, "The name Alan Wilmer mean anything to you?" And I said, "Yeah, Parkway murder suspect."
This was the guy that was identified by an anonymous person as a peeping Tom on the Colonial Parkway. The FBI looked at him and they let him go because they couldn't prove anything.
Suddenly, there's a connection back to the Colonial Parkway, which means a connection potentially to all the Colonial Parkway murders, which means you start looking for where do we have DNA that we might be able to compare. Robin Edwards had been sodomized, and to the credit of the Virginia State Police, they managed to maintain some of the samples of that DNA for ages.
Alan is deceased, but now we have a DNA sample from him, and they compare that sample taken from the victim to the sample taken of Alan Wilmer Sr., and it's a 100% match. Well, my. After decades of work and effort and theorizing, they finally have a name. All these years later, Alan Wilmer Sr. is the Colonial Parkway killer.
Best way to put what I was ecstatic. You know, I was ecstatic. I was also humbled and a little bit irritated at myself that I knew that Alan Wilmer was a great suspect.
But who is this guy? Who is Alan Wilmer Sr.?
What was Alan Wilmer besides a murdering piece of shit? He was a waterman.
He was a commercial fisherman specifically who farmed clams and oysters. He spent the majority of his time on his boat, a vessel he named Denny Wade.
From a geographic perspective, the anchor point is the York River, and that's where he worked every day. It makes complete sense that it was a waterman all along.
Also, Wilmer was an avid hunter. He belonged to a hunt club not far from the area where the fourth murder victims were discovered skeletonized.
When you look at Phelps Lauer, their bodies were found on a private hunting reserve. Is there a connection? We don't know. But where there's smoke, there's often fire.
Everything about Alan Wilmer's life fits the entire style of the Colonial Parkway killer. He moves by boat. He's around at night, where you can see the lovers' lanes from the water. Everything about him seems to come together once he's identified and firmly linked scientifically to one victim.
The FBI had called us, and they let us know that they had a DNA match. I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked.
I got a call from our case agent, and they were bringing up Alan Wade Wilmer. It was just like, oh my God, oh my God.
Our family went through so much freaking heartache and pain wondering what the happened to my brother, you know, and come to find out they had the right guy the whole freaking time.
When you talk about anger, there has been like 35 years worth of anger. It's maddening. There he was in the very beginning.
I'm still angry about it to this day. I thought it was outrageous. They told my family they were looking at watermen. This is that guy. Is he responsible for Kathy and Becky's murder as well?
It always makes me wonder, could law enforcement have prevented the things that followed? The deaths, the loss of life.
The FBI decided that him passing a polygraph was enough to say he's not the one. The decision was made, and that wasn't made by me. I can't say we let him go, but we didn't do enough. I would have done anything, threatened him, anything else to try to get him to admit to it, but I don't think he was the kind of person that would.
He passed a polygraph, but so what? He also happens to be a sociopath, so he doesn't react. Thus, a polygraph is useless. He's not capable of emotion.
Someone like Wilmer, I killed 2 people today. Big deal.
That's what makes him so dangerous. Why is there only a DNA hit on one case when there are 4 double murders that everyone says are connected? One possible answer is no evidence contained any perpetrator DNA.
Robin and David's murder, that is the only one of the 4 that there was actual known DNA evidence.
So, what is known about the 4 Colonial Parkway double homicides?
At the very beginning, the FBI behavioral profilers said watermen.
The first 3, 86, 87, 88, all of them took place right against the water, either the York River or the James River.
You're dealing with a creature from the Black Lagoon. It's possible that in the first murder, he spots Kathy and Rebecca in Lover's Lane, together in a car, approaches them, He strangles them and he slashes their throats. He put them in Kathy's Honda, soaked it in diesel fuel, tried to burn it. Then he shoved it over the embankment, assuming it would sink in the river and disappear. His attempt at disposal is a disaster. In the second killing, David Knobling and Robin Edwards, he sodomizes Robin Edwards, and he shoots her in the back of the head. David is shot in the shoulder and the back of the head. They're thrown in the river, assuming they'll float away, but they wind up trapped under the embankment. Another failure. However, DNA this time remains behind, which ultimately becomes his undoing.
By Keith and Cassandra's murder, he had perfected his craft.
If this was his third murder, he abducted and killed them, threw them in the water.
He went out and he fished, clammed, oystered from that boat. How hard would it have been to take them out on that boat and dispose of their bodies? It would have been very easy.
The fourth murder, Daniel Lauer and Anna Maria Phelps. They are discovered miles away from the Parkway.
My best speculation is they stopped at the eastbound rest area of New Kent. That's where Wilmer took control of them. And then they were carried to these two positions where they were found.
It seems he learns from his mistakes. He gets better at disposing of remains. But what is his deal about couples? Does he hate them? What motive could there be? Maybe just a willingness to kill. And perhaps that's the only motive he needs.
Now, we learned that Wilmer's sphere was even larger. We now have some evidence that we can weigh against these other cases.
Here we have Alan Wilmer. We have him tied to the murder of Robin and David. Luckily, we got DNA from that.
But that wasn't the only crime his DNA hit on.
He was tied to another murder of a lady in Hampton.
There was a 29-year-old woman named Teresa Howell who left the nightclub and disappeared. She was found naked, strangled, and raped. And the perpetrator DNA was none other than Ellen Wilmer Sr.
We now know that he killed people that were alone. So the net gets cast pretty wide to look at cases that this guy may have been involved with.
Well, it's always difficult to say what will happen now. Will the DNA science advance further? Will they be able to determine something from some of these cases to link him directly to the crime? It's entirely possible. Prosecution will never occur. You can't prosecute a dead guy.
But I hope he's facing some kind of judgment.
Well, you would hope so. You would hope so. Perhaps he'd move to a higher court.
If we had had hindsight and law enforcement in general, FBI, state police, Isle of Wight County Sheriff's Office, this would have been handled different. But the only answers we can really for sure give is to Miss Howell's family, the Noblin family, and the Edwards family. The FBI and the Virginia State Police, they have not stopped. And I hope they can tie him to any and all of them. All these families deserve answers.
This completely destroyed my mother. In one night, she lost her only daughter, her youngest child, and her best friend. This is a solvable case. All it takes is time, attention, and resources.
It's not something that we ever wanted to be burying a younger brother. Keith was just starting out his life. He had aspirations. He was a good kid.
I hated that he didn't have the opportunity to grow up, and to have a family. I mean, that got robbed, Keith. He robbed him of a whole entire life.
That was my big brother, man, Doesn't get any tighter than that. I mean, it's not fair. I've missed so much with him. So much. I know my life would have been so much different if he was still in it. God, I wish he was still here.
Some people never have to pay the bill for what they've done in their life. They just croak, like everybody does.
I'll be quite frank with you. I hope there is a special place in hell for this man. And every day, what he did to those kids is done to him for eternity. Then maybe it'll be a little bit of justice.
There's supposed to be justice and punishment. Not always the case. Wilmer denied the hangman's noose. However, he died in his hovel of a trailer and turned into a puddle of DNA. No one cared about Alan. Maybe Alan didn't either. He cared about killing, and he got pretty good at it.
So what kind of things were these voices saying?
To kill somebody.
There are people in this world who are patently evil.
My mind went to that. Someone took her. Someone is trafficking her.
Do you think you're going to convince a jury that you don't have nothing to do with that?
I just felt like I gotta solve this case.
A lot of murderers are emotional when they take a life. Not him. He's cold as ice.
How much worse will it be if we don't get who did this?
And I'm like, what? What do you mean? They've been murdered.
We're not just the police, we're the murder police. When Kane busted a Cap and Abel, did he send a uniform to take the report? No, he sent a f***ing detective.
The night Illinois stopped breathing began with a routine traffic stop on a rain-slicked highway, a simple flick of red and blue lights cutting through the darkness, a moment so ordinary it barely deserved memory, and yet hidden inside that fleeting second was the echo of a scream from 30 years earlier, a scream that had never truly faded, only buried beneath time, fear, and the quiet conspiracy of forgetting, waiting patiently for a single mistake to rip it back into the world. The rain fell in thin, icy needles, blurring the windshield of the patrol car as it rolled along Route 47, a lonely stretch of road slicing through fields stripped bare by winter, where the wind moved like a restless animal and the silence pressed hard against the ears. The officer's shift had been uneventful, a string of minor violations, a broken taillight, a missed stop sign, nothing more than the steady grind of small-town policing. Then the scanner crackled. A dark sedan, erratic driving, possible intoxication. The car was spotted drifting across lanes, its tires hissing across wet asphalt, as if the driver were fighting an invisible pull. The cruiser accelerated. The lights ignited. And history, long dormant, quietly stirred. The vehicle slowed, veering onto the gravel shoulder. Its engine coughed once, then settled into a low, uneasy idle. The officer stepped out, boots crunching softly on wet stones, the night closing in around him, the scent of rain and cold earth hanging heavy in the air. Inside the car, a man sat rigid behind the wheel, hands fixed at 10 and 2, knuckles pale, eyes staring straight ahead. He looked older than his years, his face lined by fatigue and something deeper, something harder, like a life spent constantly bracing for impact. His name, according to the license, was Daniel Harper, age 58. Local address. No outstanding warrants. No criminal record. Just another driver, just another stop. Or so it seemed. The officer leaned closer, catching the faint smell of alcohol, mixed with something metallic, something sharp, a scent that triggered an instinctive tightening in his chest. A question. A pause too long. A flicker of panic in the man's eyes. Then the slightest tremor in his right hand, barely perceptible, but enough. The routine script faltered. Backup was called. The man was asked to step out of the vehicle. Rain streaked down his jacket as he stood beneath the flashing lights, shoulders hunched, breath uneven. And in that fragile space between compliance and resistance, something broke. His voice cracked. Words spilled out, tangled, desperate, incoherent. A name, a date, a place, and then a phrase that landed like a thunderclap. I didn't mean to kill her. 30 years earlier, on a humid August morning in 1992, the town of Willow Creek had awakened to sirens and disbelief. The body of 19-year-old Emily Carter was discovered in a shallow drainage ditch just beyond the edge of town, her pale skin stark against the dark mud, her eyes open, frozen in an expression that seemed to ask a question no one could answer. She had been reported missing the night before after failing to return from her shift at a roadside diner, a place where truckers and late-night workers crossed paths beneath flickering fluorescent lights, where coffee was cheap and conversation was currency. Emily was known there for her quiet smile, her careful kindness, the way she remembered regulars' orders and asked about their families. She had plans. College brochures folded neatly in her bedroom drawer. A suitcase half-packed beneath her bed. A future just beginning to unfold. The ditch lay less than 2 miles from her home. The scene was chaotic, raw, unguarded. Muddy footprints trampled fragile clues. Rain threatened to wash away whatever secrets the ground still held. There were signs of a struggle, broken twigs, disturbed soil, a single shoe lying several yards from the body, its laces still tied. No witnesses came forward. No weapon was found. The autopsy would later reveal blunt force trauma and asphyxiation, but little else. The time of death was estimated within a narrow window, but the hours were thick with uncertainty. And so, almost immediately, the case slipped into that gray territory between evidence and speculation, where suspicion multiplies but answers remain scarce. Willow Creek was a town that trusted its own reflection. Front doors were left unlocked. Children rode bicycles long after sunset. Neighbors waved from porches and shared casseroles in times of grief. The murder of Emily Carter cracked that fragile illusion, exposing the fear beneath. Candlelight vigils lined Main Street. Yellow ribbons fluttered from telephone poles. Her photograph stared out from every shop window, a constant reminder that something terrible had passed through and might still be lurking just beyond sight. The police worked around the clock, canvassing homes, questioning coworkers, retracing Emily's final hours. They traced her steps from the diner to the bus stop she never reached, followed the thin trail of possibilities through cornfields and back roads, but each path ended the same way, dissolving into silence. Rumors bloomed in the absence of facts. A jealous boyfriend, a drifter passing through, a customer who lingered too long, asked too many questions. Names surfaced, then faded. Alibis were scrutinized, then discarded. A composite sketch circulated briefly, its vague features haunting but useless. As weeks turned into months, the investigation slowed, momentum bleeding away as leads dried up and hope thinned. The file thickened. The questions multiplied. And Emily's name joined the long, aching list of Illinois cold cases, unresolved, 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 a drumbeat that echoed in the minds of those who still remembered. Her parents aged beneath the weight of waiting. Her mother kept Emily's room untouched, dusting the shelves, smoothing the blankets, as if her daughter might walk back through the door at any moment. Her father spent nights in the garage, dismantling and reassembling old engines, hands busy, thoughts relentless. Every phone call sent a jolt of adrenaline through their bodies. Every unfamiliar car slowed outside the house ignited a flare of hope, then disappointment. Years passed. Investigators were tired. New officers inherited the file, leafed through brittle reports, stared at grainy photographs, and felt the same helpless frustration as those before them. The town learned to live around the absence, to step carefully across the wound and pretend it had healed. Until that rain-soaked night, when a trembling man stood on the shoulder of Route 47 and whispered a confession that no one was prepared to hear. Daniel Harper's words tumbled out in fragments, disjointed and raw, as if the dam he had built inside himself for 3 decades had finally collapsed. He spoke of a chance encounter, a ride offered, a moment of anger spiraling out of control. He spoke of panic, of the crushing realization that there was no turning back. He spoke of a body left in the dark, of driving away while the echoes of his own heartbeat drowned out everything else. The officer listened, stunned, the rain soaking through his uniform, the cold seeping into his bones, each sentence tightening the knot in his stomach. Backup arrived. Then detectives. Then a forensic team. The highway was sealed. The man was taken into custody, his face hollow, eyes distant, as though he had already retreated into some internal courtroom where the verdict had long been decided. News traveled fast. By dawn, Willow Creek was awake, phones buzzing, radios murmuring, televisions flickering with urgent headlines. A name long buried surged back into public consciousness. Emily Carter, 19. 1992, cold case. Solved. The words felt unreal, stitched together like a sentence from another life. Reporters descended on the town, their cameras trained on the modest houses and empty streets, searching for images that could capture the magnitude of the moment. Old neighbors gathered in hushed clusters, memories flooding back, disbelief etched across their faces. Could it really be over? Could the waiting finally end? But answers, once summoned, rarely arrive neatly packaged. As investigators began to peel back the layers of Daniel Harper's life, new questions emerged, darker, more unsettling. He had lived in Willow Creek in 1992, but only briefly. A rental apartment near the highway. A job that lasted less than a year. Then he vanished, leaving behind no forwarding address, no lingering connections. For decades, he drifted across state lines, working odd jobs, blending into the anonymous sprawl of America's back roads. No arrests. No reported incidents. A ghost moving quietly through the margins of society. How had he evaded suspicion for so long? Why now? What had finally cracked the facade? The confession alone was not enough. Detectives needed corroboration, evidence to anchor his words to reality. They returned to the old case files, tracing every detail, every overlooked scrap. They revisited the ditch where Emily had been found, now overgrown with weeds and wildflowers, the earth soft beneath their boots. They searched for remnants long presumed lost, fragments of truth hidden beneath layers of time. And as they did, the town held its breath, caught between relief and dread, aware that reopening a wound often reveals more than anyone is ready to face. In quiet living rooms across Willow Creek, people sat before glowing screens, watching the story unfold, each update stirring memories they had carefully sealed away. Parents hugged their children tighter. Old friends exchanged solemn glances. Somewhere, Emily's mother stood in the doorway of her daughter's untouched bedroom, fingers tracing the edge of a faded poster on the wall, listening to a stranger on the television speak her child's name with clinical detachment. Closure, they said. Justice, they said. But no word could fully capture the complexity of a grief stretched across 30 years. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets, pooling in the gutters, tracing shimmering paths beneath the streetlights. The same rain that had soaked the highway during that fateful traffic stop, the same rain that had blurred the boundary between past and present, between a forgotten crime and its long-delayed reckoning. And in its steady rhythm, there was a reminder. Some stories refuse to remain buried, no matter how deeply they are hidden. They wait, they linger, they watch. And when the moment is right, they rise, demanding to be heard. Because this was never just the story of a man pulled over on a lonely road. It was the story of a town forced to confront its own shadows, of a family trapped in an endless vigil, of a single night in 1992 whose consequences rippled outward for decades. It was a story about memory and denial, about the fragile line between ordinary life and unimaginable violence. And as the first light of dawn crept across the Illinois horizon, illuminating the wet pavement and the silent fields, one truth settled heavily over Willow Creek. The cold case was no longer cold, but the darkness it revealed was far from gone. The interrogation room was cold, its fluorescent lights humming softly above a steel table scarred by years of restless hands and quiet confessions, and Daniel Harper sat motionless in its center, his wrists cuffed, his gaze fixed on a spot just beyond the wall, as if the past itself were standing there, waiting. The rain still clung to his jacket, darkening the fabric, the faint smell of wet asphalt and stale alcohol hanging in the air, while two detectives studied him from across the table, their faces a careful blend of restraint and disbelief. 30 years of silence had led to this moment, and yet the words that had spilled out on the roadside now seemed to retreat, coiling back into the shadows of his mind. They began gently, confirming his name, his address, the slow geography of his life since leaving Willow Creek, and he answered in clipped phrases, each syllable measured, controlled. But when they spoke Emily Carter's name, something shifted.
His jaw tightened.
His shoulders sagged. The room seemed to contract, the walls inching closer, the air thickening with memory. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the careful mask had cracked. He said he had carried her face with him for 3 decades, that he saw it in every darkened window, every passing stranger, every moment of quiet. He said he had learned to live with the noise of guilt, but never with the silence that followed it. In August of 1992, he had been 24, newly arrived in Willow Creek, chasing the promise of steady work and a chance to start over after a string of failures that had left him restless and bitter. He rented a small apartment near the highway, furnished it sparsely, and spent his evenings driving aimlessly through town, learning its rhythms, its habits, its blind spots. He noticed the diner almost immediately, its glowing sign a beacon in the dark, and he began stopping there late at night, lingering over coffee, listening to the hum of tired conversations. That was where he first saw Emily. She had been wiping down the counter, her hair pulled back, a loose strand falling across her cheek, her expression focused but gentle. He remembered the way she smiled at customers, not the practiced grin of obligation but something softer, as if she were genuinely glad they were there. He remembered thinking she looked too young to be standing beneath those harsh lights, too hopeful for a place that thrived on exhaustion. He came back the next night, and the next, always at the end of her shift, always alone. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they did not, but a fragile connection formed, woven from small exchanges and unspoken assumptions. On the night she vanished, the diner was unusually quiet. A summer storm had chased most travelers off the road, leaving only a handful of regulars scattered across the booths. Emily finished her closing duties early, stepping outside into air heavy with the promise of rain. Daniel was waiting in his car. He said he offered her a ride, that she hesitated, glancing back at the empty building, weighing the familiar against the unknown. He said she eventually agreed, slipping into the passenger seat, pulling her jacket tight around her shoulders. They drove along the back roads, past fields that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. The silence between them stretched thin. What happened next, he claimed, was never planned. An argument sparked over something trivial, a misunderstanding, a word taken the wrong way. His frustration, long suppressed, erupted. The car swerved onto the gravel shoulder. Voices rose.
Doors slammed.
And in that charged, breathless space between anger and regret, he struck her.
Once.
Then again. The force of it shocked him, snapped him into a terrible clarity. She fell. He panicked. He said he tried to wake her, that he whispered her name, that he shook her shoulders until his hands ached. But she did not move. Fear surged, eclipsing reason. He dragged her body to the ditch, the mud swallowing her weight, the night closing over them like a curtain. Then he drove away, his heart hammering, the image of her stillness burning itself into his mind. The detectives listened in silence, their pens scratching steadily across notepads, Each detail another thread to be tested, another claim to be verified. Confessions, they knew, could be fragile things, shaped by guilt, fantasy, or the simple desire to end a long torment. They needed proof. They pressed him for specifics. The exact road, the turnoff, the landmarks he remembered, the clothes she wore, the words she spoke. He answered haltingly, dredging details from a well of memory he had sealed long ago. Some matched the case file. Others did not. The gaps between them loomed large. Forensic teams were dispatched to the locations he described, guided by his uncertain directions. They combed through weeds and soil, searching for any fragment that time might have spared, a scrap of fabric, a buried personal item, a trace of blood preserved in the earth. Technology had advanced beyond anything imagined in 1992, and investigators hoped that even the smallest remnant could yield DNA, could anchor his story to reality. Meanwhile, analysts reopened old evidence, subjecting it to modern testing, hoping to find what had once been invisible. As the investigation reignited, the town was pulled back into the orbit of the crime. Neighbors who had long since made peace with uncertainty found their routines disrupted by memories they had carefully compartmentalized. Old witnesses were summoned, their recollections probed for overlooked details. Former co-workers of Emily returned to the diner, now remodeled and renamed, standing beneath brighter lights, tracing the ghost of a girl who once moved quickly between tables. Some wept openly. Others spoke in clipped tones, defensive, wary of being judged for what they had not seen, what they had not said. One woman remembered a dark sedan idling across the street that night, its headlights off. A man leaning against the hood, smoking, watching the door. She had thought nothing of it at the time. Another recalled Emily mentioning a regular customer who made her uneasy, who asked personal questions, who lingered after closing. She had laughed it off, brushing aside the concern. A third remembered hearing raised voices outside, faint, distant, carried on the wind, but by the time she stepped to the window, the street was empty. Each fragment added texture, depth, but no certainty. 30 years had blurred edges, softened contours, warped timelines. Memory was a treacherous witness, reshaping itself with each retelling. Investigators moved carefully, aware that the truth they sought lay buried beneath layers of perception and fear. Emily's parents were brought into the station, ushered into a quiet room where detectives spoke gently, deliberately, choosing each word with care. They listened, hands clasped, faces pale, absorbing the revelation that a man had finally confessed to taking their daughter's life. Relief and anguish collided within them, a violent mingling of gratitude and grief. For decades, they had imagined this moment, the long-awaited answer to their prayers, but now that it had arrived, it felt impossibly heavy. No confession could restore what had been stolen. No explanation could soften the brutality of the loss. Her mother asked to see him. The request hung in the air, charged uncertain. After careful consideration, it was granted. She entered the interrogation room alone, the door closing softly behind her, and for a moment, neither spoke. She studied his face, searching for some reflection of the monster she had envisioned, some visible marker of the man who had destroyed her family. Instead, she saw a tired, broken figure, eyes rimmed with red, shoulders sagging beneath an invisible burden. The banality of his appearance unsettled her more than any imagined horror. He began to apologize, his voice trembling, but she raised a hand, stopping him. She did not shout. She did not cry. She simply asked why. And in that question, all the years of waiting converged, demanding a meaning that could never truly exist. Outside, the world pressed on indifferent. Cars passed along Route 47, their tires whispering over wet pavement. Children hurried to school. Farmers checked their fields. Life continued, as it always does, even in the shadow of unimaginable pain. But beneath the surface, Willow Creek was shifting, its carefully maintained equilibrium disturbed. Conversations turned hushed, guarded. Old suspicions resurfaced. People looked at one another with renewed scrutiny, wondering what secrets might still be hidden behind familiar faces. As evidence trickled in, the case teetered between resolution and doubt. A fragment of fabric recovered from a shallow depression near the ditch matched the description of Emily's missing jacket, its fibers degraded but distinct. Trace DNA, painstakingly extracted from old fingernail scrapings, produced a partial profile that analysts said was consistent with Daniel Harper. Consistent, but not conclusive. The margins of error loomed large. Defense attorneys prepared to challenge every link, every assumption, ready to dismantle the narrative piece by piece. And then, another discovery surfaced, one that threatened to fracture the fragile clarity of the confession. Records revealed that Daniel had been questioned briefly in 1992, his name appearing in a list of patrons who frequented the diner. At the time, his alibi had checked out. He claimed he had been at home, and a neighbor corroborated the story. The lead was dropped. The file closed. Now, with hindsight, the omission burned like a scar. Had he nearly been caught? Had he manipulated the investigation from the start? Or was the confession itself a fabrication, a desperate attempt to atone for some other, unnamed sin? Detectives confronted him with the discrepancy. He stared at the table, his silence stretching. Finally, he admitted that the neighbor had lied for him, that he had begged, pleaded, leveraged fear and sympathy to secure her silence. She had since died, her secret buried with her. The admission added another layer of darkness to the tale, a reminder of how easily truth can be bent, how many small decisions conspire to create an enduring lie. The case tightened around him like a noose, each new detail narrowing the path of escape. And yet, uncertainty lingered, a thin, persistent thread that refused to be severed. Because in cold cases, certainty is always a fragile thing, assembled from fragments, vulnerable to collapse. As night fell once more over Willow Creek, the rain finally ceased, leaving the streets slick and reflective, mirrors for a town forced to confront its own reflection. In the quiet that followed, the weight of 30 years pressed down, heavy and inescapable. The confession had reopened old wounds, stirred long-dormant fears, and unsettled the fragile peace built atop unanswered questions. And as the investigation pushed forward, driven by the relentless pursuit of truth, one realization took hold: solving a cold case does not erase the past. It resurrects it, dragging every shadow, every regret, every buried secret back into the light, demanding to be faced. Because beneath the headlines and the courtroom drama, beneath the language of justice and closure, there lay a deeper reckoning, one that would test the resilience of a family, the integrity of a community, and the fragile boundary between guilt and redemption. And in that reckoning, nothing would remain untouched. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant, a sterile calm stretched tight across its polished benches, and yet beneath that surface, tension coiled like a living thing, waiting. Every seat was filled. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras poised, notebooks ready. Members of the Carter family sat together in the front row, hands intertwined, their faces etched with a mix of resolve and exhaustion. Across the aisle, Daniel Harper stood in a press suit borrowed from a public defender's office, his posture rigid, eyes lowered, the weight of 3 decades bearing down on his shoulders. Outside, the sky hung low and gray, as if even the weather had been summoned to bear witness. The charges were read slowly, deliberately. First-degree murder, aggravated assault, concealment of a corpse. Each word landed like a blow, echoing through the room, reverberating in the stillness. Harper did not look up. He did not flinch. When asked to enter a plea, his voice was barely audible. Not guilty. The phrase rippled outward, a shockwave of disbelief, slicing through the fragile hope that had bloomed in Willow Creek since his confession. A murmur swept the gallery, rising, falling, then dissolving into a strained silence. 30 years of waiting had led to this, and still, certainty remained just out of reach. The prosecution began to build its case piece by piece, weaving together confession, forensic evidence, and the fragile tapestry of memory. They spoke of Emily Carter's final hours, reconstructing her movements with painstaking care. They described the diner, the late summer heat, the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. They mapped the route Daniel claimed to have driven, overlaying it with the coordinates of the crime scene, demonstrating how seamlessly the two aligned. They presented the recovered fabric fragment, its faded fibers magnified on a screen, and the partial DNA profile that, though degraded, pointed steadily in his direction. But the defense was relentless. They dismantled assumptions, highlighted inconsistencies, exploited every gap. They questioned the reliability of a confession offered under emotional duress, decades after the fact. They scrutinized the forensic methods, emphasizing the fragility of degraded samples, the statistical uncertainties, the ever-present risk of contamination. They called experts who spoke in careful, measured tones about cognitive decay, about the malleability of memory, about the possibility of false confession born from guilt, loneliness, or a desperate need for absolution. They reminded the jury that the burden of proof lay not in plausibility, but in certainty. As testimony unfolded, the story of 1992 came alive again, each witness adding another layer to the mosaic. Former detectives took the stand, their voices tinged with regret as they recounted the frantic early days of the investigation, the sleepless nights, the leads that evaporated under scrutiny. They spoke of limited resources, of the technological constraints of the era, of the relentless pressure to deliver answers in a community desperate for reassurance. They admitted mistakes, oversights, the small compromises that, in retrospect, loomed large. One officer described the moment he had first stood beside Emily's body, the shock of seeing someone so young rendered so still. His voice faltered as he recalled the look in her eyes, the sense of urgency that propelled the initial search, the slow, crushing realization that they might never find her killer. Another testified about the brief encounter with Daniel Harper, the fleeting suspicion, the neighbor's alibi that seemed airtight at the time. The admission hung heavy in the room. A single decision, made under pressure, had allowed a murderer to vanish into the anonymous expanse of a country. Then came the witnesses who had known Emily best. Her co-workers spoke of her kindness, her reliability, her dreams of escape. They described the late nights, the camaraderie forged beneath flickering lights, the small rituals that marked the end of each shift. One woman, now gray-haired, recounted Emily's laughter, the way it cut through fatigue like a blade of light. Her words drew tears from the gallery, the memory of a life paused, suspended forever in youth. Emily's mother took the stand, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She spoke of bedtime stories, of scraped knees and school projects, of a daughter who never stopped asking questions. She described the night Emily did not come home, the hours of pacing, the phone calls that went unanswered, the creeping dread that settled into her bones. When she described identifying her daughter's body, the room seemed to hold its breath, the silence thick with collective grief. Even the defense lowered their eyes. Daniel Harper did not testify. His attorneys advised against it, warning that any misstep could unravel their carefully constructed strategy. Instead, they painted a portrait of a man haunted by regret, burdened by a crime he did not commit but felt compelled to confess to, driven by an overwhelming desire to end his own suffering. They suggested he had been nearby that night, had heard rumors, had pieced together a narrative that fit the evidence, a story he repeated until it felt real. They implied that the true killer might still be free, shielded by time and chance. The jury listened, their faces inscrutable, absorbing each argument, each emotional appeal, each technical explanation. Days blurred together, testimony bleeding into testimony, the relentless rhythm of the trial mirroring the relentless passage of the years that preceded it. Outside, the town oscillated between hope and dread, coffee shops buzzing with speculation, living rooms echoing with debate. Lawn signs appeared overnight, some proclaiming justice for Emily, others urging caution, reminding neighbors of the sanctity of due process. The fracture lines of uncertainty ran deep. When closing arguments arrived, the courtroom vibrated with anticipation. The prosecution spoke of accountability, of the moral imperative to confront the past, of the courage it took to confess. They urged the jury to see the coherence of the narrative, the convergence of evidence, the unmistakable pattern pointing to a single conclusion. The defense countered with a plea for restraint, a reminder of the irreversible consequences of a guilty verdict, the dangers of convicting on emotion rather than incontrovertible proof. They asked the jurors to imagine the possibility of error, to weigh doubt with the gravity it deserved. Deliberations stretched on, hour after hour. The jury sequestered in a quiet room, their discussions hidden from view. Each knock on the courtroom door sent a ripple of tension through the spectators. Emily's parents sat rigid, their hands clasped so tightly their knuckles blanched. Daniel stared at the floor, his breath shallow, his future suspended in that sealed space. When the verdict finally came, the room rose as one. The foreperson stood, a folded slip of paper trembling slightly in her grasp.
Guilty.
The word fell into the silence, heavy, irrevocable. A gasp escaped the gallery. Emily's mother closed her eyes, tears spilling over, her husband's arm wrapping around her shoulders. Across the aisle, Daniel's knees buckled, his lawyers studying him as the reality of the moment crashed down. Sentencing followed weeks later. The judge spoke of the gravity of the crime, of the decades of suffering inflicted on a family and a community. He spoke of deterrence, of the need for justice tempered by humanity. Daniel Harper was sentenced to life in prison, with a possibility of parole after 30 years, a symbolic echo of the time he had spent in freedom since the night of the murder. As the gavel fell, a murmur swept the room, relief and sorrow intertwined. For Willow Creek, the verdict brought a measure of closure, but it did not erase the scars. The diner installed a small plaque near the entrance, bearing Emily's name and the dates of her life, a quiet memorial to a girl who had once filled the space with warmth. Each year, on the anniversary of her death, candles flickered along Main Street, their soft glow a reminder of loss and resilience. Yet even as the town sought to heal, questions lingered. Was every detail of the confession true? Had the investigation, constrained by time and technology, missed something irretrievable? Could absolute certainty ever exist in a case resurrected from the depths of memory? These doubts whispered through conversations, through late-night reflections, through the uneasy dreams of those who had lived too long in the shadow of an unsolved crime. In his cell, Daniel Harper confronted the echo of his own words, the story he had told now locked into the permanent record of law. Whether driven by guilt, truth, or some tangled fusion of both, his confession had altered the trajectory of countless lives. He spent his days in routine, his nights replaying the moments that had led him there, the rain-soaked highway, the flicker of red and blue lights, the fragile second in which everything had finally unraveled. And so the cold case, once a wound that refused to close, settled into a new, uneasy state of being. Officially solved, yet forever marked by uncertainty. A story retold in headlines and hushed conversations, a cautionary tale about the persistence of memory and the relentless pull of the past. In Willow Creek, the echoes of 1992 still drifted through the quiet streets, a reminder that some nights never truly end. They simply fade into the background, waiting for the smallest spark to bring them roaring back to life. The prison gates closed behind Daniel Harper with a hollow clang that echoed across the concrete yard, a sound that seemed to seal not just his fate, but the final chapter of a story that had haunted an entire town for 3 decades. Yet even as the state declared the case closed, even as the headlines faded and reporters packed their equipment, the past refused to stay still. It stirred in quiet corners, whispered through late-night phone calls, lingered in the uneasy glances exchanged between neighbors who had once believed they knew each other completely. Closure, it turned out, was not a single moment, but a long, uncertain process, and Willow Creek was only beginning to understand its cost. In the weeks following the verdict, detectives returned to the case file, not out of obligation, but unease. Something about the confession still gnawed at them, an intangible friction between the narrative and the evidence. They replayed recordings, scrutinized transcripts, revisited photographs that had yellowed with age. They reconstructed timelines again and again, searching for alignment, for coherence, for the elusive certainty that could finally quiet their doubts. And each time, they found themselves circling the same shadows. There were hours unaccounted for on the night Emily vanished, small gaps in the chronology that resisted closure. Witness statements overlapped imperfectly. Memories contradicted one another in subtle ways. Even the route Daniel claimed to have driven offered multiple variations, each plausible, each leading to slightly different conclusions. The forensic evidence, though compelling, remained incomplete, its degraded fragments vulnerable to interpretation. In the cold calculus of criminal justice, the case had been won. In the quieter mathematics of truth, it remained unresolved. One detective, nearing retirement, began working the case alone after hours, driven by a restlessness he could not explain. He traced Daniel's movements in the years following 1992, mapping a life lived in fragments. Construction sites in Missouri, a warehouse job in Iowa, seasonal labor in southern Illinois, short-term rentals, temporary friendships, a pattern of disappearance and reinvention that suggested not only evasion, but fear. Yet nowhere in that trail did he find evidence of further violence. No arrests, no allegations, no whispers. It was as if Daniel had sealed the darkest part of himself in a locked room and thrown away the key. Then, buried in an overlooked folder, the detective found a report that shifted everything. A call logged 3 days after Emily's disappearance. An anonymous tip, dismissed at the time as unreliable. The caller claimed to have seen a young woman matching Emily's description arguing with 2 men near the old quarry road late that night. 2 men, not one. The tipster provided vague descriptions, nothing that could be acted upon with confidence. The report had been filed, noted, and quietly forgotten. The detective stared at the page, a chill creeping up his spine. 2 men. The possibility opened a door that had long been sealed, revealing a corridor of unsettling questions. Had Daniel been alone? Had he minimized his role, or exaggerated it, to protect someone else? Or had the tip itself been a fabrication, a ghost story conjured from fear and rumor? He tracked down the original caller, only to learn that the number no longer existed, the identity lost to time. He revisited the quarry road, now overgrown and partially collapsed, its jagged edges softened by years of neglect. Standing there, listening to the wind move through tall grass, he tried to imagine the scene as it might have been. Raised voices, shadows shifting, the scrape of gravel beneath hurried footsteps. The past felt close, almost tangible, yet impossibly distant. Back in Willow Creek, the town grappled with its own contradictions. Memorials to Emily multiplied, small but earnest gestures of remembrance, a scholarship fund in her name, a mural painted on the side of a community center, a bench overlooking the river where she once liked to sit. These tributes offered comfort, a sense of purpose, but they also served as constant reminders of a wound that could never fully heal. For some, the verdict brought peace. For others, it reignited old doubts, suspicions they had buried under the weight of official resolution. Whispers began to circulate, cautious at first, then more insistent. Had the right man truly been convicted? Was the confession complete? In coffee shops and barber chairs, in church basements and grocery store aisles, people replayed fragments of the story, testing alternative explanations. Some remembered a local troublemaker who had left town shortly after the murder, his departure sudden and unexplained. Others recalled a pair of drifters seen camping near the quarry that summer, their faces lost to memory, their names never recorded. Each recollection added another layer to the fog, complicating what had once seemed so clear. Emily's parents avoided these conversations, retreating into the fragile sanctuary of their home. For them, the verdict was not a puzzle to be solved, but a boundary, a line beyond which they could no longer afford to look. The man who had confessed sat in a prison cell. The law had spoken. Reopening the case, even in imagination, threatened to unravel the delicate balance they had achieved, the first fragile sense of peace in 30 years. Yet even they felt the tremor of uncertainty, a faint vibration beneath their grief, reminding them that the truth, whatever it was, remained stubbornly out of reach. In prison, Daniel Harper settled into routine, his days measured by counts and meals, his nights stretched long and silent. He kept mostly to himself, avoiding confrontation, earning a reputation as a quiet, compliant inmate. But in the isolation of his cell, the past surged relentlessly. Memories he had suppressed for decades returned with new intensity, no longer restrained by the defenses of freedom. He dreamed of rain and headlights, of gravel biting into his palms, of a young woman's startled eyes. Sometimes he woke gasping, his heart pounding, the echo of her name on his lips. During a counseling session, mandated as part of his intake, he spoke haltingly about guilt, about the corrosive effect of carrying a secret for so long. He described the way it had hollowed him out, the constant vigilance, the fear that every knock at the door would be the last. He admitted to embellishing parts of his confession, smoothing rough edges, filling gaps with assumptions, constructing a narrative that felt complete. The revelation sent a ripple of alarm through the prison's psychological services unit, though it remained confined within institutional walls, never reaching the courtroom that had already rendered its judgment. Outside, the detective who had unearthed the anonymous tip wrestled with his conscience. He compiled a supplemental report, careful, precise, outlining the new questions, the unresolved threads. He submitted it to his superiors, aware that it might be shelved, ignored, or quietly filed away. The official response was swift and unequivocal. The case had been adjudicated. Reopening it would risk re-traumatizing the family and destabilizing the community. Unless new, definitive evidence emerged, the matter was considered closed. The detective accepted the decision, but the unease remained, a low-grade ache that followed him into retirement. He took long walks through town, past the diner, past the riverbank, past the modest houses where so many memories were anchored. He wondered how many stories lay hidden beneath the town's tranquil surface, how many lives intersected in ways never fully understood. The case of Emily Carter, once a singular tragedy, had become a prism through which he viewed everything else, a reminder of the limits of certainty and the enduring power of doubt. Years began to pass. New families moved into Willow Creek. Old landmarks disappeared, replaced by modern facades. Children who had not yet been born in 1992 grew up hearing Emily's story as a cautionary legend, a tale of danger and resilience. The scholarship fund flourished, sending dozens of students to college, a living tribute to a life cut short. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the intensity of the past receded, settling into a quieter, more manageable form. Yet on certain nights, when the wind rose and rain lashed against the windows, the old fears returned. People lay awake, listening to the storm, imagining the echo of distant sirens, the flash of red and blue lights against wet pavement. The memory of that traffic stop, that accidental unraveling of a decades-old secret, hovered at the edge of consciousness, a reminder that the past is never truly gone, only waiting. Because beneath every solved cold case lies another, more elusive mystery, the question of whether truth and justice can ever fully align. In Willow Creek, the answer remained suspended, a fragile balance between belief and skepticism, hope and resignation. The story of Emily Carter had been written into the town's identity, shaping its fears, its compassion, its understanding of loss. And as time marched on, indifferent to the weight of human sorrow, that story continued to pulse quietly beneath the surface, an unresolved chord in the long, complex symphony of memory. The rain would fall again. Headlights would slice through the dark. And somewhere, in the space between what was known and what would never be known, the echo of a single night in 1992 would endure, unresolved, unforgotten, a whisper that refused to fade. Time did what it always does in places scarred by tragedy. It layered new routines over old wounds, muffling their edges, but never fully erasing their shape. In Willow Creek, the seasons continued their slow rotation, summers heavy with cicada song and cut grass, winters sharp with frost and silence. People married, divorced, buried parents, welcomed children. The diner where Emily once worked changed owners twice, its booths replaced, its sign repainted, its floors scrubbed until no trace of that final night remained. And yet, beneath every fresh coat of paint, beneath every cheerful renovation, the memory of her absence lingered, woven into the town's subconscious like a buried current. The scholarship fund in Emily's name grew steadily, fueled by annual charity runs, bake sales, and anonymous donations. Each year, a local student stood on a small stage in the high school auditorium, trembling with gratitude as they accepted an award that carried Emily's name. Her parents attended every ceremony, their applause soft but resolute, their presence a living reminder of what had been lost and what might still be redeemed. In these moments, grief transformed into purpose, sorrow into resolve. It was not closure, but it was survival. Yet far beyond the town's borders, the story continued to ripple outward, its impact magnified by distance and imagination. True crime podcasts dissected the case in obsessive detail, their hosts poring over transcripts, crime scene photos, and trial footage, weaving theories that ranged from plausible to fantastical. Online forums bloomed with speculation, armchair detectives arguing late into the night about timelines, motives, and the unsettling possibility of a second perpetrator. Daniel Harper's name became a cipher, a blank canvas onto which strangers projected their fears and fascinations. For some, he was the embodiment of long-delayed justice. For others, a convenient scapegoat in a narrative too tidy to be trusted. The resurgence of public interest reopened wounds the town had worked so hard to cauterize. Journalists returned, seeking fresh angles, knocking on doors that had already endured too many intrusions. Old witnesses found themselves drawn back into interviews, their words extracted, edited, and rebroadcast, stripped of context, reshaped for dramatic effect. Even Emily's parents were not spared, their private grief transformed into consumable content, their most intimate memories repurposed as narrative devices. The glare of attention was relentless, unforgiving, and it stirred a quiet resentment among those who had lived the story rather than merely observed it. In the midst of this renewed scrutiny, an unexpected letter arrived at the county prosecutor's office, postmarked from a correctional facility hundreds of miles away. The handwriting was careful, almost delicate, each letter shaped with deliberate restraint. It was from Daniel Harper. Inside, he wrote of regret and insomnia, of memories that refused to loosen their grip. He wrote of the trial, of the faces he could not forget, of the mother who had stood before him and asked why. And then, near the end, he wrote a sentence that reignited every dormant doubt. "There are things I did not say, because I was not the only one there." The letter sent a tremor through the already fragile sense of resolution. Prosecutors debated its meaning, weighing the risks of reopening a case that had already consumed enormous resources and emotional capital. Was it an attempt at manipulation, a desperate bid for relevance, a calculated effort to fracture the fragile peace? Or was it a confession within a confession, an admission too heavy to carry alone? The ambiguity gnawed at them, the words lingering like an unsolved riddle. The detective who had once uncovered the anonymous tip was consulted, his voice cautious but insistent. He urged a review, a limited inquiry, a careful probing of the shadows Daniel's letter had illuminated. Others argued for restraint, warning that even a minor reopening could unravel years of healing, subjecting the Carter family and the entire town to another cycle of trauma. The debate stretched on, mirroring the larger conflict between justice and mercy, truth and stability. In the end, a small task force was quietly assembled, its mandate narrow and discreet. They revisited the quarry road, deploying ground-penetrating radar, drones, and forensic dogs, technologies unavailable in 1992. They combed through land records, construction permits, and property transfers, searching for evidence of disturbance, concealment, or hasty abandonment. They re-examined old tips, cross-referencing them with modern databases, tracing names and vehicles that had once dissolved into anonymity. What they found was subtle, fragmentary, but unsettling. Soil samples near the quarry revealed traces of automotive fluids inconsistent with Daniel's vehicle. Tire impressions, long degraded, hinted at a second set of tracks. A rusted beer can, unearthed from a shallow depression, bore partial fingerprints that did not match Daniel or Emily. None of it was definitive. All of it suggested possibility. The investigation extended beyond Willow Creek, following faint trails across state lines, reconstructing the movements of transient workers, seasonal laborers, and short-term residents who had passed through the area that summer. Records were incomplete, memories unreliable. Many had died. Others could not be located. The past resisted reconstruction, its fragments scattered too widely, its witnesses too diminished. Meanwhile, Daniel remained in his cell, his days punctuated by the ritual of count and meal, his nights haunted by visions he could no longer suppress. In another letter, never sent, he wrote of the second man, a figure half-formed in his memory, someone he had met only days before, someone whose name he struggled to recall. He wrote of fear, of shared guilt, of a pact forged in panic and sealed by silence. He wrote of the moment he realized that confessing alone might be easier than unraveling a truth that implicated another life. The letter remained hidden beneath his mattress, its words trapped in the limbo between confession and denial. Back in Willow Creek, rumors of renewed investigations seeped into the community despite official denials. The old unease resurfaced, subtle but persistent. People began locking their doors again, checking windows twice before bed. Conversations trailed off when strangers entered the room. The sense of safety, once restored, flickered uncertainly, threatened by the realization that the past might not be finished with them after all. Emily's parents sensed the shift immediately. They confronted the prosecutor, demanding honesty, clarity, an end to the half-truths that had defined so much of their lives. When they learned of Daniel's letter, their reactions diverged. Her father burned with anger, convinced that the man was manipulating them, prolonging their suffering for reasons only he could understand. Her mother, quieter, felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the old instinct to search for answers no matter the cost. They argued late into the night, voices low, grief and hope colliding once more. In the fragile space between these competing impulses, the town waited. For some, the possibility of another perpetrator reopened wounds they had only just begun to close. For others, it offered a grim solace, that the evil of that night might not be reducible to a single face, that the randomness of violence was not as arbitrary as it seemed. Each interpretation carried its own burden, its own uneasy logic. As weeks turned into months, the task force's efforts yielded no conclusive breakthroughs. Leads evaporated. Names circled back to silence. The quarry road surrendered nothing more. The rusted beer can remain an anomaly, its partial prints untraceable in any database. The second set of tire impressions could not be definitively dated. The investigation stalled, suspended once again in the gray space between suspicion and proof. And so, gradually the momentum faded. Resources were reallocated. Files were returned to storage. Officially, the case remained closed, the supplementary inquiry quietly shelved. But the questions it raised refused to vanish. They lingered in whispered conversations, in the restless dreams of those who had lived too long with uncertainty, in the hollow spaces where certainty ought to have resided. Because some stories resist neat endings. They fray at the edges, unraveling just enough to remind us of their complexity, their refusal to conform to our desire for order. The story of Emily Carter had become one of those narratives, a cautionary tale about the limits of justice and the endurance of doubt. And in the quiet moments before sleep, when the world receded and memory stirred, Willow Creek felt once more the faint, insistent echo of a single night in 1992, still unresolved, still whispering its unanswered questions into the darkness. The quiet that followed the shelving of the renewed investigation was not the peace Willow Creek had hoped for, but a brittle stillness, a fragile truce between exhaustion and unresolved fear. On the surface, life resumed its measured rhythm, yet beneath it, something had shifted. The knowledge that the past might still be incomplete settled into the town like a low fog, blurring the edges of certainty, softening even the firmest convictions. The verdict remained. The sentence stood. But the story no longer felt finished. In the months that followed, subtle changes emerged. People began noticing things they had once ignored. A man walking his dog at dawn along the riverbank paused when he spotted a weathered shoe lodged in the reeds, its style eerily reminiscent of early 90s fashion. It turned out to be nothing more than discarded trash, but the jolt of recognition lingered. A teenager exploring the abandoned quarry road with friends uncovered a rusted key buried beneath loose stones, sparking a flurry of speculation before investigators confirmed it bore no connection to the case. Each false alarm fed the same restless energy, the same quiet insistence that the truth had not yet fully surfaced. Local law enforcement, though officially disengaged, found themselves fielding a steady trickle of calls. Anonymous tips arrived at odd hours, their voices distorted by fear or anonymity, offering fragments of rumor and half-remembered encounters. A man who claimed to have shared a campsite with two strangers near Willow Creek in 1992. A woman who swore she had seen Emily speaking with someone other than Daniel at the edge of the parking lot that night. None of the leads could be substantiated, but each one tugged at the fragile thread of closure, threatening to unravel it once more. The internet amplified these uncertainties, transforming private doubt into public spectacle. Amateur investigators dissected satellite imagery, mapped theoretical routes, constructed timelines dense with conjecture. Old yearbook photos were scrutinized for faces that might match blurry composite sketches. Social media accounts appeared, dedicated solely to Emily's case, their feeds a relentless churn of speculation and sorrow. For Willow Creek, the renewed attention felt like an invasion, a reopening of scars that had barely begun to heal. In prison, Daniel Harper watched these developments from a distance, the news arriving in fragments through contraband phones and whispered conversations. He oscillated between a desperate urge to speak and an equally powerful instinct to remain silent. The second man he had alluded to in his letter haunted him, a shadow that refused to take solid form. He remembered fragments, a name that hovered just beyond recall, a voice roughened by cigarettes, the glint of fear in unfamiliar eyes. He remembered the hurried conversation after Emily lay still, the frantic bargaining, the shared understanding that silence was their only refuge. But memory, warped by time and guilt, refused to crystallize into certainty. During therapy sessions, he circled these recollections, approaching them obliquely, testing their edges. He spoke of shared responsibility, of moral cowardice, of the way panic can weld strangers together in an instant of irreversible consequence. The prison psychologist listened, her expression carefully neutral, documenting his words with clinical precision. She urged him toward clarity, toward specificity, but each attempt only deepened his agitation. The more he tried to remember, the more elusive the details became, slipping through his grasp like water. Beyond the prison walls, the detective who had once championed the supplementary investigation felt the same restless pull. Retirement had not dulled his instincts. If anything, it had sharpened them, stripping away bureaucratic restraint and leaving only a stubborn pursuit of coherence. He spent long evenings revisiting the case, poring over digital copies of old reports, cross-referencing names and addresses, constructing elaborate webs of possibility. His wife worried about the toll it took, the way his sleep fractured, his patience thinned. But he could not let it go. Not when the unanswered questions still whispered so insistently. One evening, while reviewing a list of seasonal workers employed by a nearby construction company in 1992, he noticed a name that had not surfaced before: Michael Rourke. The records were scant, the details minimal, but something about the entry caught his attention. Rourke had worked briefly in the area that summer, residing in a temporary housing complex less than a mile from the diner. He had left abruptly in early September, his forwarding address listed as unknown. No subsequent employment records appeared in state databases. It was as if he had vanished. The detective traced the name through national systems, uncovering a faint trail: a minor arrest in Kentucky in 1995, a brief stint in a rehabilitation facility in Tennessee, a death certificate filed in Nevada in 2008. Rourke had died alone, his body discovered in a motel room, the cause listed as heart failure complicated by substance abuse. No next of kin were recorded. No personal effects remained beyond a worn duffel bag and a stack of unpaid bills. The trail ended there, in anonymity and neglect. Yet the timing unsettled him. The proximity, the abrupt departure. It was not evidence. It was not even suspicion, not in any formal sense. But it was a shadow, and in a case built on shadows, that was enough to provoke unease. He documented his findings, filing them away in a private archive, unsure whether they would ever serve a purpose, but unwilling to let them fade into obscurity. Back in Willow Creek, Emily's parents confronted the relentless churn of speculation with quiet resolve. They limited their public appearances, declined interview requests, and focused their energy on the scholarship fund and local outreach. For them, the constant reopening of the case felt like a betrayal of the fragile peace they had fought so hard to achieve. They had buried their daughter once. They could not endure burying her memory again and again beneath layers of conjecture. Yet in the stillness of their home, doubt crept in. Her mother found herself replaying old conversations, searching for overlooked clues, wondering if Emily had ever mentioned someone else, a name, a face, a fleeting concern. Her father lingered over faded photographs, scrutinizing the backgrounds, the blurred figures at the edges of the frame. Each attempt to anchor memory only deepened the ache of uncertainty. As years slipped quietly by, the case settled into a new, uneasy equilibrium. Officially resolved, privately unsettled, it became a story told with qualifiers, its ending perpetually conditional. Students who received Emily's scholarship learned the outlines of her life, the tragedy of her death, the perseverance of her parents, but the complexities of the investigation faded into abstraction, their significance diluted by time and distance. And yet, in moments of collective reflection, the town still felt the pull of that unresolved night. During storms, when thunder rolled across the fields and lightning fractured the sky, people remembered the rain that had fallen on Route 47, the flash of red and blue lights that had finally cracked open decades of silence. They remembered how easily ordinary moments could tip into irrevocable change, how thin the line was between safety and catastrophe. Because the true legacy of a cold case is not its resolution, but its endurance. It reshapes how a community understands itself, how it measures trust, how it navigates the fragile space between fear and hope. In Willow Creek, the story of Emily Carter had become a quiet compass, orienting every act of caution, every gesture of compassion, every silent prayer whispered into the dark. And so, even as the official record declared the matter closed, the deeper narrative continued to unfold, carried forward in memory, in doubt, in the persistent, unyielding search for meaning. The night of her disappearance remained a living presence, an unanswered question drifting through the years, reminding everyone who felt its weight that some truths resist capture, lingering just beyond the reach of justice, waiting, perhaps forever, to be fully known. The years moved on with a quiet inevitability, yet the story of Emily Carter refused to settle into the past. It lived in the margins of everyday life, in the spaces between conversation and silence, in the way people paused before speaking her name, as if the sound itself might reopen something too fragile to touch. In Willow Creek, memory became a landscape, one navigated with care, its contours shaped by grief, resilience, and an unspoken understanding that some wounds, no matter how old, never fully close. Children who had grown up